Hello, Lab Out Loud listeners. Before we get into today's episode, we'd like to give you a little bit of a warning. This episode's about sex. There's nothing inappropriate in this episode. However, we do get into topics that might make some listeners blush. Support for Lab Out Loud is provided by the National Science Teachers Association. Find out more at nsta.org. Welcome to the Lab Out Loud podcast, science for the classroom and beyond. In today's episode, we take a look at sex in the animal kingdom.
And so something like a barnacle, they basically do have the largest penis to body size ratio in the animal kingdom. And so, okay, well, you say that, but there's really not much that really drives that point home for you. Until, in my show, 7 African models walk in with a 15-meter long penis, which is meant to be the sort of comparable size of what it would look like if that was on a human.
And that's our guest, Dr. Carin Bondar, who will be talking to us in just a minute. But first, this is Lab Out Loud, and I'm your co-host, Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel.
And we're back, second episode of Season 10.
Yeah,
it's like we're
Season 10.
Yeah, we're in double digits now.
We've matured to 10 years. Dale.
Correct. A couple programming notes, just how to get this podcast. It's at laboutloud.com. Of course, you can listen from there. But for the last episode, I added the feature now that allows us to have our shows posted on YouTube, which means there's not a video, but it's just playing the audio through YouTube. So some people who can get to YouTube on certain devices and things like that, or TVs and stuff, you can listen to the shows on YouTube now.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh, we also have, your iTunes, and also there's the Google Play Music also does podcasts now. Actually, It's a great place to find podcasts if you have an Android phone and stuff. So check that out. We have links on our website for that. You can find it all at laboutloud.com.
It's about time we matured enough to be able to do some of those things. After 10 years or so, well, we've talked about a lot of topics before.
Yeah.
But we haven't really talked about sex.
That's right.
This is like our first sex episode.
It's like we're sitting the podcast down and having the talk.
It is. 10 years old? Is that when we have it? Well, here's the thing.
Grade is where they're first introduced with my kids were.
Yeah, that's about it. Well, in reality, though, we did find someone to talk to us about sex. And when we're talking biological sex in the animal kingdom particularly, and how it could be actually used to teach biological concepts. So this might be particularly helpful for you teachers out there to be thinking about this. Of course, we'd absolutely remind you, as we do in the podcast and on the show notes, that definitely pre-screen anything before you show it to students. Some of the content may not be appropriate for students at all. And if it is, it's probably on our secondary level at most, if not beyond.
Good point. And so our guest is with us right now to get us started.
So my name is Carin Bondar. I am a biologist from Vancouver, Canada, and I guess in other worlds, I am known as the wild sex biologist, and this is because I have done a lot of work looking at reproduction in the animal kingdom, and I like to sort of anecdotally point towards humans a lot of the time, partly because I am human and partly because I like to think about how we do things differently than the rest of the animals out there.
So, obviously are you called a sex doctor? Is that fair? Or
That's like Dr. Ruth.
Right? Well, interestingly, I'm called everything, and I can fit that to pretty much whichever audience I'm working with. Yes, a lot of the times I am called the wild sex biologist, and that is because the YouTube show that I wrote and hosted is called Wild Sex, and so yeah, I guess that's sort of how a lot of people recognize me or know me, and it's sort of a title that rolls off the tongue.
So you're studying biology. I'm thinking back to your early career. How did you head down this path?
Yeah, you know what? It was not a direct path. My education is not in this area at all. I looked at aspects of developmental biology and how the process of development fits into ecosystem and food web models. But after I graduated with my PhD, I was very pregnant with my second, and I have 4 now. So I was basically at home taking care of these lovely children, and I decided to start writing and communicating and blogging and sharing. And I did this in a lot of different ways at a lot of different platforms, most notably Scientific American. I worked for them for a long time. And I noticed every time that I wrote about sex, that sex was part of the equation, people were just that much more interested. And, at the time it should have been obvious to me, but it wasn't. But I sort of just started going towards the sex stories because people were just so much more responsive, more questions, more comments, stuff like that. And, just one fateful day, I like to say, this company called Earth Touch had seen a piece that I had done on sex, on romance in time for Valentine's Day. And or romance or lack thereof in the animal kingdom. And they said, well, we want to do an online series about sex, and would you like to write it and host it? And I was just like, yes, I would. And, the beauty of the internet as opposed to the television world is that 6 weeks later I was on a plane to South Africa, and we shot the thing. We shot 21 episodes in 9 days. And we just kind of didn't hold back. It was really bold, the kind of storytelling I like to do, which is bold, unapologetic. This is not David Attenborough talking about something. This is Bondar on a street corner in the middle of the night in Durban dressed as a hooker talking about trading sex for goods in the animal kingdom. It was really something new, I guess you could say. And, to this day, we're right around the 60 million views mark. So, it was something that worked out, that people really responded to.
I'm going to make sure I put David Attenborough, in like one of the tags for this episode, because I feel like that's appropriate to mesh with this. Because
right?
that's when I think about high school and going through and even teaching biology, he was a staple of learning about how the animal kingdom works.
Absolutely. And it's sort of just this legendary, if you notice, the bird.
Let's take a closer look.
Totally. And that's awesome. And that, so as a sort of newly fledgling science communicator, that's first of all, that's not my personal style. And secondly, let's mix it up a little bit. Let's maybe try and tell science stories also in a really educational and effective way, but stir the pot a bit.
So give us some examples. What did you discover?
Oh, gosh. Well, when doing the series, what I discovered is when people can relate, or when there's something that makes people, that maybe shocks you at first, or that really pulls you in, then you get a higher level of engagement. So, for example, we did an episode on size matters, and we wanted to talk about sort of how the ecology of an organism, or how every aspect of how it lives, may be impacted by the manner in which it's able to reproduce. And so something like a barnacle that is stuck to the ground, in the intertidal zone where it lives, is not able to get out. And a lot of invertebrates do broadcast spawning, but in this particular case, most beach barnacles do not. And so they have an extremely large member, I guess you could say.
We can say penis.
Oh,
We're talking anatomically here. I think we can do that.
High school students are allowed to hear the word penis. Okay, perfect. So they basically do have the largest penis to body size ratio in the animal kingdom. And so, okay, well, you say that, and people are like, oh, okay. But there's really not much that really drives that point home for you until in my show, 7 African models walk in with a 15-meter long penis, which is meant to be the sort of comparable size of what it would look like if that was on a human. And so it's poking fun and just being like, hey guys, this is what we're talking about here, and here's why that's important. And I think that's a real important point that I always like to drive home, is that I'm not just talking about sex for sex's sake. It's rarely just about trying to shock people. What it's trying to do is draw you in and bring you the important learning lessons, the important points about biology, evolution, social behavior, physiology that come from this. And, there were so many times when we were shooting the series that, even the cameraman would be like, oh, well, I didn't I didn't think about it that way. And it's just like, yay, exactly. That's totally the point.
So I think in many ways, too, teachers absolutely do this. Not necessarily to say they're looking for shock value, but a way to bring students in, make the material seem relevant or engaging for that matter. Why would we want to learn this? And if you can trick them into paying attention, even more so, the better. So do you see sex being used as a way to teach biology?
Absolutely. I absolutely do. And
well, isn't it like, I mean, it's driving biology. It's driving evolution, isn't it? I mean,
well, this is it, right? And I like to point out, and it's funny because I do talks at educational institutions, but I do talks like everywhere for corporate institutions, everywhere. And people are like, well, what on earth does sex have to do with, this gas company? And it's like, well, guess what, guys? The reason you're at work today is because you're probably looking to support the fruits of your sexual labors, and sex is everywhere. Sex is sort of, as you've just said, it drives everything that we do. It's sort of why we exist. I mean, survive, reproduce, right? And so I like to make sure that my audiences kind of gain a greater appreciation for just how much sex influences all aspects of our daily lives. Though we as humans try to squash that away, it sort of comes glaring back at us when we're least expecting it.
My high school biology teacher, Mrs. Clough, always reminded us that the purpose of life was to have kids who could have kids. And that was kind of like a driving message whenever we learned content. How does this help a species to have kids who can have kids? And of course, the underlying piece of that is sex and how you reproduce and pass on your genetic makeup to your offspring.
Absolutely. Exactly. And that's, and humans are interesting because we've taken a lot of the biology out of that equation. And so we do things like adopt children that don't genetically belong to us, or we take contraception, which aims to quash our ability to have kids who can have kids. And so these are also really relevant aspects. Children, high school students growing up sort of just go, okay, yeah, here's what we do to have safe sex, or we, But what is the biology in that? Why would you do that? And what's the greater context? Because there's a lot of learning to be done in those regards.
Do other animals take on those characteristics, like adopting and contraceptive?
Yeah, sometimes they do. And, that's when it's really interesting to examine these situations. So a lot of cases in seabird colonies where many, many couples are roosting in very close quarters. And in a low food year, mom and dad will have to both be out searching for food. We often do see some kind of babysitting taking place. So not necessarily adoption, but lending a hand. And a lot of group living organisms will often see some members of the group are non-reproductive, and their role is simply to help raise the offspring of the alpha couple. Contraception is an interesting one, and we see shades of this in a lot of our closest primate relatives, most notably a species of baboons in Nigeria that eat this African black plum when it comes into season. The females do anyway. And these are generalist feeders, so they could be eating on any number of things. But when the plums are available, they go for the plums. And there's so much progesterone in the plums that it actually has a function of shutting down their reproductive cycles, which is
and they don't need a doctor's note for that,
right?
What if their insurance doesn't cover? Are there
and then biologists are of course all up in arms, like why?
Several forms.
It's like
or if they work for a religious community, I mean, then
right,
sorry.
then they'd need to.
They check with their baboon elders, things like that. Well, yeah. So how does that? Is that an accident? Is that a?
Well,
where's the advantage there?
We, some biologists will say it's more, it helps for future reproductive cycles if they take a few cycles off. So ultimately it does increase their overall level of biological fitness, that kids who have kids thing. But, I kind of go, well, you know what? People, maybe, these are our closest primate relatives. Like, these are things with brains and emotions and complex social structures. Maybe these ladies are like, woohoo, plum season.
Yeah.
Let's take a break.
You think they would know, though?
Oh gosh, yes, I do. Absolutely.
I don't understand. Like, how are they going to know the plum's doing the job?
Well, and again, we don't speak baboon, so it's tough to ask. But I would just say you've got to look at the parallels here in terms of how human females learn these things. I mean, indigenous cultures around the world know things about certain plants, and the whole field of ethnobotany looks at how indigenous communities use plants for various things. It's really not that much of a stretch to think that our closest primate relatives do the same.
So do male baboons
they do
look
not
at that behavior and change their mating or their at least pairing because
That's a
of that?
good question. Yeah, the studies that I've read have not actually concerned themselves with the male's behavior surrounding that, but that's an excellent.
Like, she's all up in plum. We got to go find something else.
Right? We got to self-direct here.
Do you ever get a chance to go through what we would call them high school textbooks in biology? What's missing? What sex is missing that should be there?
Gosh, unfortunately, I am quite far removed from school level study. And my own children are still pretty young. So my eldest is 11, and he's just going through the first sort of, talks that they do. Mm-hmm. Let's all discuss what's happening here. So I haven't had a chance to really firsthand come into contact with a lot of that stuff. But I do know that there wasn't a lot of that when I was growing up. There was sort of this mystery surrounding it, or like a very embarrassed teacher kind of reading word for word from a page at the front of the classroom, trying to avoid eye contact with any of the students in the class. And I guess at the time, maybe that's just what it was, but I don't know. I'm not entirely, I guess maybe you guys would have a better understanding of what is lacking as far as sex education goes.
Well, in the States, and we're, of course, in the U.S. here, from our experiences, and it varies from state to state, but, we definitely see human reproduction usually taught in like a health class. And in our state, you can actually opt out of that. So that's an interesting, because that's something that could be taught at home, or we feel that that's a more appropriate discussion for a family rather than a school. And that's an interesting situation, of course.
Wow. I find that just fascinating and scary, because humans, we're just so apt to deny sexuality and not talk about things that are happening in the body. I mean, how many young women understand what it is that's going on in their body when they start menstruating? Or
well, the rationale there is that the parents, the people that would opt their children out would say it is my role to teach this to my children instead of the school.
Interesting. Okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, but how many parents are effectively doing that, I guess, would maybe be the follow-up question. And how many parents really understand it for themselves?
Netflix does that now. So.
Right? YouTube. You can just YouTube it. Which is good. I mean, I guess on some level, the internet does allow children to get a greater level of understanding about any number of things, but I think just having a frank discussion about these kinds of things, both in the home, of course, that's important, but in school. I mean, this is biology. We're animals. Guess what, people? We're an ape. Here's what happens. And I think understanding that is really important, as far as understanding who we are and what we do, and this getting away from this whole notion that we're somehow way better or different from any other animal out there.
Well, we definitely have a split like that. There is the human growth and development, the health class, sex ed things. Let's talk about humans. And then reproduction is taught, reproductive system in our biology classes.
Yeah.
I wonder if those should be married a little bit more.
And from my experience, and this could be different for different textbooks or curricula, but a lot of times those high school biology textbooks are fairly utilitarian when they get to the reproductive section. And like Dale said, from our experiences, at least, that a lot of that other, what you do with sex and everything else is done in that human reproduction or growth and development piece.
It'd be interesting to see how they deal with, like, let's pick another system, nervous system. Do the textbooks start off with, okay, students, you're humans, let's talk about your nervous system, and then branch out to other animals?
I believe that they do, yeah.
And then do they take a big U-turn when they hit the reproductive system?
Which is hilarious and not surprising.
Well, it's also interesting because it kind of mirrors the evolution debate place in textbooks as well, because, and this has changed quite a bit, but we used to see many textbooks that didn't have they weren't formally addressing evolution, and some of them were very specifically not addressing evolution for different states. And, although you could make an argument that it's there, obviously evolution's there, it's just not being mentioned by name. And maybe that we could also say that sex is there, it's just not being, advertised like that.
Mm-hmm. And what service does this do to our young emerging minds? It's teaching them, first of all, it's teaching them that we're different, we're better, we're isolated, especially when it comes to sex. Secondly, it's teaching them that sex is this secret kind of, this is something that needs to be done sort of behind closed doors and in bedrooms and underneath sheets and whatever. And I guess that's one of the things that really does separate humans from other animals, is that we have this sort of notion of secrecy and modesty when it comes to sex. I mean, for all other animals, sex is kind of just like having breakfast. Like you just kind of, okay, it's time for that. And
are any other animals modest about sex, though? Do they hide, when they're doing it?
No, I mean, not unless they are doing it because they're needing to be secretive in terms of an alpha partner that's close by, or they're cheating or whatever.
Well, I would think they might be like vulnerable to predators or something like that. If you're an animal, you're having sex, you're not necessarily focused on the environment around you.
Absolutely. And that comes to that comes down to the balance between surviving and reproducing and the trade-offs that you make in order to do this. I mean, look at sort of things like canines that actually get stuck together for quite a while when they're having sex. Like they physically cannot get apart from each other. I mean, that's awkward and bad, when they're all of a sudden there's a predator nearby. So yeah, I guess in terms of hiding, I guess what I mean is not hiding from each other, or there just isn't this notion of modesty that we have, this secrecy. This, look, you have genitals, weird.
You could take that another level, too, if you think about a peacock who is obviously displaying its sexual prowess with its plumage and coloration, and that's quite a disadvantage for against predators finding it, too. But the advantage is so much greater than, hey, I'm out here.
Wasn't there advantage, though, that they can kind of distract to kind of protect the mother?
No, I mean, that's the age-old balance between natural selection and sexual selection. And for many males in the animal kingdom, there's actually a chapter in the book about this, that, the things that make them gorgeous to females are precisely the things that make them vulnerable to predators. And so there's got to be a trade-off. And again, it's something that each species and each individual within a species sometimes will get to on their own accord. But that's really a big question of biology, a central question. Like, how do animals balance? Because you've got to be gorgeous, or a female is not going to choose you. Females are choosy. Males are, You
got to think about that next time you get your wardrobe set up, Dale.
Yes. Well, see, I had it explained. Well, the attracting the female part also, but then the other side was that some birds, the male is very vibrant, while the female blends into the environment. That way, if they're together, the male will draw the predator, and the mother and eggs and hatchlings and stuff will be hidden. I don't know if there's any merit to that, or that's.
I'm not entirely sure, but that's sort of like an altruistic thing. I mean, I don't know, because like in birds, it depends on the system, really. Like there's definitely systems that are skewed towards males that simply provide sperm and nothing else, and no parental care. And we generally see the really showy males in this category because they're putting all of their energy into being gorgeous. And they therefore just want to contribute sperm to as many women as possible, or females as possible. Okay. Then we see other systems where males will actually give more effort in terms of sitting on eggs at the nest and whatever. And in these species, males often look a lot like females. So that's a tough one. And then certainly, I mean, biology, if there's one thing I know about biology, it's that there's an exception to every rule. So
what works for one species is not for another.
Oh, yeah. And every time we think we've got a really good trend going, another species shows up that's totally doing the opposite thing that we would expect. But that's why I love biology. It's great.
So if you had the chance to have a conversation with high school science teachers, what would you say to them to say, all right, this is where do you need to put sex back into school? If you could say that.
It's a great question. I guess for me and for my kids, I really just don't want or need there to be any mystery. I want them to have a good understanding of what puberty and sex mean, both on a level of biology and then perhaps on a level of humanity and emotion. And I'm very used to using, sex words. Like it's, there's nothing funnier than walking into a talk that's full of, people in suits and conservative dress and just standing there on the stage and going, penis. Because they're all like, whoa, oh my God, you can't say that. It's like it's a swear word or something. But I think kids feel the same way. And why do they feel the same way? Because their parents are teaching them that it's got to be a secret. Like it's this secret place that you have, and we're not going to talk about it. And it's, it's this mystery box of whatever. I guess I would like to just see the conversation become a lot more frank. And I think that starts with just understanding biology. It can be very innocuous. Hey, here's a system. We have a system. We are animals. Here's how it goes. Here's what you need to know. Here's why this is happening to your body right now. And no embarrassment, I think that's, if teachers especially have their own issues surrounding talking about it or teaching it, then that's going to obviously reflect on how their students feel about it too.
So you're starting off with the terms then. I mean, I think that would be a big step towards the frankness is just, let's call a penis a penis. The other things like, there's always a opportunity to kid around and joke. Yet I think that would kind of go the other way with frankness if you're teaching it.
I guess every classroom and every teacher is going to have their own style. Some are going to use humor because they use humor when they teach. That's, some are going to take a more serious approach because that's their policy. I guess maybe the common theme that I would love to see is just a lack of embarrassment. Because if the teacher is embarrassed to be talking about it, the students are going to feel that. They're going to feel that there is this shame and this secrecy to it. And that's not easy, I think, but I'd love to see that trend change. And I guess I've, my entire professional career, the entire point of my master's degree had nothing to do with actually sex, but it had to do with looking at the developmental position of the anus of these little snail embryos. And so I just got used to saying anus, anal position, anal, blah, blah, blah. Like it was just part of my...
It's on her license plate. No.
Right. Totally. And, it's just, I think we just need to get used to using these terms. Like, guess what? We all have one. Like, it's just not that crazy thgoing. It's just part of what we have. That's all. And if we get better at our understanding of it, we're going to use it smarter. We're going to feel better about ourselves in a lot of different ways.
You have a lot of resources, obviously. You have some books, you have some videos. Tell us what's high school appropriate. What could teachers use in their classroom to help them teach sex?
Interestingly, yeah. So the wild sex...
Or to teach biology using sex, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it'll depend, again, on sort of the nuances of each classroom. I would say that a lot of the wild sex series is probably not appropriate for some younger grades. But there are a lot of great resources out there, and I guess it depends. Certainly a lot of the work that I've done and the entire series would definitely be appropriate, I would say, for 11th and 12th graders. Because by that time, my goodness gracious, what they've seen in music videos is 10 times more. Well, and to that end, I do have a video that I did, was a parody of Miley Cyrus' Wrecking Ball, and that is about evolution. It is called Organisms Do Evolve, and that one has done quite well, and I know some teachers have used that. Then again, I am naked on a wrecking ball, so it's going to vary by classroom.
So yeah, and this is definitely an area where it's important to preview your videos before you'd show them to any classes.
Well, and the other thing is we talked about the teachers being uncomfortable, perhaps. Maybe watching or reading your materials will help them sort of break their ice in their own mind and then establish, what they're more comfortable with and coming up with those ideas and, discussing with peers about where to go with that.
Let Dr. Bondar say it instead of the teacher. So
I think so. Yeah.
True.
Because and it's not, like I said earlier, it's not sex for sex's sake. There's a lot of really great information there, and it goes by episode. Some episodes are certainly tamer than others, and there are just so many good ways to use sex to talk about these concepts we've discussed: sexual selection, natural selection, population biology, social behavior. So many good ways to do that, and I do think I've done it well.
Well, that's good. Any other last parting thoughts? This is the moment where you have the mic and say, "Hey, this is what we need to do with sex."
Yeah, gosh. Well, what we need to do with sex is realize that it plays a greater role in our lives than we generally like to think as a species. We're quite comfortable with saying that all other animals have to have kids who have kids, but what about us? And I like to use that. I like to draw humans into the equation to sort of get us thinking about how we are more biological than we like to believe.
On that note, well, thank you so much for your time.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks much. For links and other information related to this episode, visit laboutloud.com. You can send us your questions and comments at laboutloud.com/contact.
If you enjoyed the show, make sure you've subscribed on iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, or your favorite podcasting platform. And if you really enjoyed it, consider leaving us a rating or a review. Your feedback helps others find our show.
Until next time, I'm Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel.